I apologize that we are starting a bit late, but this is the tube strike which has caused this problem. I have great pleasure in introducing to you Anand, who is also a personal friend, and we went together to the same public speaking club a long time ago, when Anand had already, by then in college, published a book of poetry, which he doesn't want to be reminded of now.
Clearly.
And it might be of some interest to you that Anand was born in a Brahmin family, and we lost touch for a while, and when he next surfaced in public life, he was converted himself to a Dalit. He became an Ambedkarite. He was campaigning actively for the rights of Dalits, and I was very inspired that my friend had started a publication agency, a publication house, which today is very respected for publishing Ambedkarite literature, by which one means rationalistically oriented literature for the Dalits, the untouchables. And only 10 days ago, I think that was, Anand published an important article in the Hindu newspaper, talking about why it is so important for the non-Dalits to take up the question of the liberation of Dalits, and why it should not be limited to the Dalits to fight for their own rights, which is really the theme of our conference and the purpose of our getting together. Anand has also written a few controversial articles, controversial for those who don't like them, articles about Gandhi, about Periyar, the racism of Periyar, the silliness or the stupidity of Gandhi about the various things that they were advocating. But I should let Anand speak about all these people. He is certainly one of the most qualified to be able to speak about Ambedkar and look back at the legacy of Ambedkar. Anand.
Thank you. I apologize profusely for the delay in my reaching here. I've been making an effort since 7:30. Got into a bus, got off, and then took a cab, and then a bit poorer at the end of the day. But nevertheless, I'm here, and I'm glad to see there are other people also who have made it here. First, to start off on a note which Babu talked about when I was in Nizam College. This was roughly 93 to 1990 to 93. I was 17, 18, and then there was Babu Gogineni coming and telling me one of the worst institutions in India is caste, and one should oppose the Sankaracharya. I mean, he was talking about Sankara, as in the 8th century Hindu revivalist who established maths across the country, 4 mutts, and he was holding forth on this over chai in an Irani cafe in Hyderabad, and I just didn't understand what was happening, because I had been brought up in a very conservative Brahmin family, which was not very well read in even the scriptures which they seem to uphold. It was a very ordinary middle class family and there were no books in my house, and I didn't get to read a range of literature which generally people think that a person of Brahmin background is well read, is very well informed, he knows his history, or she would at least know their own culture. Because if I spoke to my parents about something and they forced me into a humiliating ritual when I was in class 9, which is called the Upanayana ceremony, and I protested, cried and shrieked. The least I could do was not let them shave my head. I mean, now I do it on my own, but that meant keeping a tuft of hair here as well and going to school. I said that's the most shameful thing that I can do. And for me, when I think back on this, these are ways in which caste ties you down. They try to brainwash you from your childhood. I remember when I was in class 11 and 12, my grandmother used to keep telling me, listen, there's no future for you in this country. You're bright and you're upper caste, so you have to study very hard and get out of this country. There's no future for you because there's reservation. And she was always afraid I might become an Naxalite, because I was in Warangal studying back then. And Unfortunately or fortunately, I can't say why, I didn't really get too attracted to the Naxalite ideology. Also because of the way in which your mind has been coached and conditioned by parental colonialism, which is one form of caste entrenchment. You know, they start stuffing your head with ideas about whom to meet, whom to talk to, what kind of food to eat. They wanted me to be a tennis player, but they wouldn't feed me any nutritious food which involved some protein-rich meat diet. No, you just have to eat your dal and vegetables and play cricket, and they say become Ramesh Krishnan. They would never say become Anand Amritraj or Vijay Amritraj. They were dark Shudras as far as my parents were concerned. Even if Ramesh Krishnan wasn't all that good a player, he is your role model. You know, so and the whole impetus of to break away from all this. When my first experience with caste, as to encounter my own caste, was in the hostels of Nizam College, where I studied in Hyderabad, and where I was probably the only Brahmin hostel resident, where you had, it was full of rural OBCs, mostly Dalits, some Muslims, mostly Telugu speaking. And for me, the horror was about the fact that I could not get along with so many people as I would have loved to. They regarded me highly because they thought I was conversant with English. English was an issue. But these are my initial exposures to caste, and that was the time when Ambedkar's centenary was being celebrated in 1990. And for the first time I saw his pictures and portraits, and there were struggles over putting up a picture of his in the Central University hostel, B hostel, where I was studying. And the Dalits wanted to put him up, nobody else wanted to have a picture of, they said, if you have a picture of Gandhi, why can't you have a picture of Ambedkar? Which is when I first read Ambedkar and Annihilation of Caste, and then it opened a whole world to me, and I was quite confused. I was thinking, why is this battle going on between Gandhi and Ambedkar? It didn't initially make a lot of sense to me. Then my serious encounter with caste happened simply because I was dating a non-Brahmin woman in my class as a girlfriend, whom I went on to marry. I mean, not as a wonderful a story as Mahanandiya would have had to say. I mean, I didn't really cycle around or do much. I just goofed around in Central University, Hyderabad. But that made me think, you know, and the idea that several classmates of mine in college would choose caste-compatible partners. They would test out somebody and see whether the girlfriend is or the boyfriend is somebody whom you can introduce to your parents. And then they decide, okay, this is not going to work, we're just going to have some fun for a while and then move on. So they would seriously throw the caste net out, you know, when in terms of even love, you know, is so conditioned. And the people falling in love with Brahmins. There were Kannadiga Brahmin friends of mine who would somehow manage to find only a Kannadiga Brahmin girlfriend. And the radicalism of it would be the girl would be 6 months elder to the guy, and they would not tie a thali, or, you know, but caste remained. They would be progressive, they wouldn't want to go through a regular ritual marriage, but caste remained. And for me, when I thought of what to tell my parents, it was like, you know, this is where I need to break with them, because there was no way in which my parents would have regarded anybody non-Brahmin. I did not marry a Dalit or untouchable caste person. I mean, I didn't fall in love with one. There was also a bit of falling in love involved. It was not a stratagem to say I'm going to do an intercaste marriage. But when it happened, as far as my parents were concerned, she was simply untouchable. As far as Brahmins are concerned, and I belong to a subcaste within the Tamil Brahmins, for them, anybody who's not a Brahmin is not to be reckoned with, is a non-person in many ways. Which makes me understand why Ambedkar throughout is so vitriolic and so strong and trenchant in his critique of the Brahmin and what the Brahmins as an intellectual class have done to India. He's completely shocked that they call themselves an intellectual class in the first place, because he says they're incapable of thinking. They're incapable of thinking for themselves, and the idea for him is to be rational. If you were rational and if you were a thinking person, you would first thing is give up caste. But he finds, when he sees all this, that he grew up at a time when it was completely a kind of a nationalist movement going on. There was the dominance of Congress when he comes back. I mean, I don't know if I should give a brief introduction of Ambedkar to people here. Why are we talking about Ambedkar? He was born in 1891, April 14th, in a place called Mau, which is in Madhya Pradesh. He was in Madhya Pradesh, though he is actually a Marathi-speaking Mahar caste person. He was born in Madhya Pradesh because his father was a Subedar Major, retired Subedar Major, who was posted in Mau at that time. And then Ambedkar goes to school in Satara. And one of his first experiences in 1901, and by 1857, after the Woods Dispatch, schools were opened up in India to everybody, meaning people of all castes and women could go and study for the first time. This was thanks to initially the East India Company making some feeble efforts, and after the Queen's proclamation, there was this Woods Dispatch, and they said education is for all. And there were riots in India in several places saying we won't go to the same schools, we won't go and study with those untouchable kids. And schools were burned down. Several, I mean, Ambedkar himself documents several such incidents from Maharashtra and Bombay presidency. And it was under these circumstances that Ambedkar, as a Mahar boy, goes to school. And then he finds that nobody would want to talk to him, his tiffin would be something that he has to hide. And for water, he has recounted all this in a series of autobiographical sketches called Waiting for a Visa. And these were published posthumously only in 1990. There, in one of the stories, he recalls how in 1901 in Satara, when he's a boy of 10, he's sitting in a school and he's denied water, and he constantly has to wait for the peon to come and give water. And each time the peon will say, well, I can't keep waiting for you to give you water, now you go home. But he can't go draw the water himself and drink from the common tap. So it's a whole vexatious issue, and I think this had a strong impact on Ambedkar in terms of how he looked at the idea of water. I think the genesis for the and this was at a time when he goes back, and he recalls this incident, and he says he goes back home after this denial of water. He meets his aunt who's taking care of him, and he says, when will we meet father? Where is father? Father, by then Ramji Sakpal, is in Koregaon. He says he's building a tank, a water tank for the entire village, so that they can be saved from the oncoming famine. So here's the father who's building a tank for an entire village for water supply, to ensure water supply during a famine. Whereas Ambedkar back home is thinking that I'm being denied water in the school, whereas my father is trying to build a tank for the entire village. I'm sure that irony is not, it's not stated in as many words. One has to read it between the lines. And Ambedkar goes on to win a scholarship after he does very well, and after his matriculation, he gets a copy of The Life of Buddha is gifted to him. And it's a huge moment in his life because it kind of anticipates the fact that he is attracted to Buddhism, and then he seriously pursues an engagement with Buddhism, and his interest in history is revived in terms of reading an alternative history of what was, and the particular book that I refer to is Revolution and Counter-Revolution in Ancient India, where he talks about the whole struggle in ancient India as a struggle between Buddhism and Brahmanism. And Brahmanism unfortunately wins, and he charts out an alternative history, a kind of very subaltern history, especially at a time when nationalists were talking about Indian history as Hindu history. So he was talking about Indian history, and importantly ancient Indian history, as a Buddhist history. So the impetus for all this comes because after he finishes his graduation here, he decides to, he's supported by the Maharaja of Baroda, and he goes to Columbia to do his PhD. He writes an important paper back then in 1916 called Castes in India, which is where I think Kamarjeet Singh was drawing from yesterday, where he talked about how women are the gateways to patriarchy and caste in India. So there was one very early thesis when Ambedkar was probably 24 or 25, he wrote that, and he talked about how the whole hierarchical caste system is kept intact simply by the fact that you need to have marriages and you need to protect women, which is why you have child marriages in India. You had child marriages in India, and there was this whole controversy when the British tried to legislate on that and said that you need an age of consent at least. Okay, you go ahead. Why would you want to have child marriages? Simply because before a child develops the agency and the thinking capacity to say, well, this is the choice I wish to make, this is the choice. I mean, there's a terrible chance of falling in love and saying, no, 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 and rebelling against your family. So all this is capped by simply saying, before you even attain puberty, especially with women, you get married, which is how Gandhi got married, which is how Ambedkar got married. They all married very young. I mean, Ramabai was 12 and Ambedkar was about 19 when he gets hitched up with her. It's a very oppressive system. I mean, this was happening to Gandhi, a Baniya. This was happening to a lot of Brahmins, and it continues to happen in large parts of Rajasthan, where child marriage is one way of keeping in check any possibility of intermarriage and intermixture among people. So Ambedkar was anxious about these things, and in Columbia he gets a very fine education, and John Dewey is his teacher. He goes on to do a PhD there, and then he comes to LSE here and studies in London. He is a student of political economy here, and his interests become very wide-ranging, and he finds a sense of space and to think and reflect on issues the way he would not have been able to do back in India. So when he gets back to India in 1916-17 and tries to, he's under contract with the Baroda Maharaja who sponsors his education, so he has to go back and serve him, which is a way of repaying the loan. And what does he do when he goes back to Baroda? He has to find a place to live, and nobody wants to give him a place to live. His Hindu friends deny him, his Christian friends deny him, and one Muslim friend says, I'll have to check with my wife, I can't tell you. So it's like he's saying, oh my God, I'm so educated, I'm so qualified, and I'm dressed well, and nobody wants to give me a room, so let me try to get a room for rent. And back then in Baroda, you would have to say your caste, or I mean, all these chowdhuries and other places are on caste lines. Hotels are on caste lines and religious lines. So he doesn't get, and then there's no places run by Dalits for Dalits. So he has no idea where to live. So finally he decides, okay, there's one Parsi inn. The Parsi community is quite similar to the Brahmins in its sense of fire worship and its sense of ritual purity and pollution, and they are a very small minority. They're the most minority among minority communities in India. They just number a few thousands today. And so he goes to this Parsi inn and says, I want a place. He said, you're not a Parsi, you don't look like a Parsi. And the Parsis do wear very distinct marker which sets them apart. And he said, you're not a Parsi. So he says, look, you don't have any occupants and I need a place. So why don't we just enter my name as Parsi? So he fakes his identity and then enters the hotel, the inn, and then gets his boarding there. But eventually he's found out. And there are a bunch of people who come to literally with sticks to kick him out of the place, and then Ambedkar goes out and sits in a park there and then thinks about how horrible life has been treating him. And I'll share a small incident in Baroda right now. There's a group of Dalits who has gone and dug up the municipality records and tried to find out where was the exact Parsi inn which is no longer there. They want to reclaim history and to find out which is the park where he went to and where did he stay, because this was official Baroda Maharaja appointment. So there were records. But interestingly, these activists who started doing this in the last 3-4 years found that those particular sheets of pages from the municipal archives have been torn. So they do not want to leave a record. I mean, it's no other page is torn. So they are now waging a struggle to get and they have decided, after doing some kind of local investigation and inquiry and detective work, that this is the tree under which Ambedkar sat. Now they want that tree named as a museum. and officially they have kind of, the municipality there is now under pressure, recognized that that is probably the tree Ambedkar sat under. It's almost like they want to say he attained enlightenment there, like the Buddha. For them, there's a great emotional bond to this whole issue. And well, Ambedkar, the point of this is Ambedkar experiences this constantly, even when he's working in the Baroda Maharaja's office as an account person, and they do not want to hand files to him, so they fling the files at him. And even water is something that he is not allowed to have, and they say if he uses that little mug there to pour water for himself, others would not go touch him. They want to ritually cleanse it, and which is what leads Ambedkar. And then he goes back to London, finishes his studies, comes back, and he just wants to be a lawyer. He just wants to get on with life. He's not really at that point interested in plunging into real life activism and, you know, literally sullying his hands with activism. He's quite reluctant. I mean, this is some information I owe to Anand Teltumde, who's married into the Ambedkar family. He has married the granddaughter of Ambedkar. He tells me that Ambedkar back then was just saying there were activists who went around him. He said there's a whole effort we are trying to mount in Kalaram temple, the Mahat Satyagraha, which was to happen eventually. And Ambedkar says, no, just leave me. I have lots of debts to settle. He had debts to settle. And then he comes back and says, I just want to be a lawyer. I mean, I'll fight cases. I'll just be a fine lawyer. But he's literally dragged to the field. And the people were seriously saying, come on, you're our only hope. You have gone there, studied, come back, you need to take up this case. And then he takes up the Mahat Satyagraha case, leads a whole agitation, which is also about going and taking water from the public, what should be a public tank, because it's a temple tank, and he says we'll draw water from there, simply because it's a civic right. So it was the equal, and then there you should see his speech. He's talking about the French Revolution, he's talking about it as important as the fall of Bastille, and he's saying this is, and to an audience which probably hasn't heard of liberty, equality, fraternity. And he's goading them to go fight, get your rights. And then after they do this, the Brahmins of the temple come and ritually clean the temple by pouring cow's urine in it, by pouring, these are actually things which will muck up the place. Not the act of defiance of drinking water from the place, but the act of pouring cow's urine, and which is considered sacred and holy for them. And that's a way of, actually, if you think reasonably and rationally, you will say that this is quite stupid. How would you clean a tank by pouring cow's urine and dung and a mixture of all these potions into that? So this was something that Ambedkar was completely appalled by. His inquiry into this, into the scriptures, make him write. I mean, he wrote about what get mostly published posthumously as to about 23 to 24 volumes, some of them fatter than this book, and this itself contains about 500 pages. His corpus is immense. And what are the issues he covers? He's talking about water. He has written on partition, the question of separate electorates. He was a policy maker of a wide-ranging depth. He knew his economics, and in this, there's one whole section on linguistic states. So when we talk about the legacy of Ambedkar, one doesn't know where to start. You know, now people talk about, I just like to show you a map which he draws for the linguistic states of India. And if you see, he has divided Babu, Andhra and Hyderabad here. You know, he wants a Telangana state back then. And you must see the way he has divided Uttar Pradesh. He says large states are unmanageable and they lead to a communal majority, and those who are huge in number. So look at how he has divided Uttar Pradesh. There is the division of Uttar Pradesh as Western Uttar Pradesh, Central Uttar Pradesh, and Eastern Uttar Pradesh. And Bihar is another unmanageable state as far as he is concerned. He wants it divided into North Bihar and South Bihar. Why would he say that? Now I'm going to give you his reasoning for this. And when he writes this in the preface, the formation of linguistic states, although essential, cannot be decided by any sort of hooliganism, nor must it be solved in a manner that will serve party interests. It must be solved by cold-blooded reasoning. Cold-blooded reasoning. That is what I have done, and this is what I appeal to my readers to do. And he lists out what is the States Reorganization Committee doing, where is it going wrong, and what needs to be done. And at one crucial moment in that, he talks about how bigger states are going to create majorities. And when what he talks about here is communal majority. And what is a communal majority? Now, you have a first past the post system, and you have a constituency. He has been, since 1931, he has been consistently critiquing parliamentary democracy and its limitations. What are the limitations of parliamentary democracy when it doesn't reckon with social democracy and economic democracy, and when it offers only political democracy as a solution? And his whole engagement with policy making and with governmentality and administration, be it negotiations with the British or with the Congress subsequently, has been motivated by the need to protect minorities. His whole idea, whole principle of democracy for him revolved around how well the minorities are protected in a democracy. And he felt that in India, if you just do parliamentary democracy, nobody is going to benefit. Especially the minorities are going to suffer deeply. People who rely upon majority rule forget that, majority rule simply because more people voted for something, so they get into power and then they decide. So who are these more people? What is this Bahujan which would decide the course of policy and governance and all that? That is something that he's scared of. People who rely upon majority rule forget the fact that majorities are of two sorts: communal majority and political majority. A political majority is changeable in its class composition. A political majority grows. A communal majority is born. The admission to a political majority is open. The door to a communal majority is closed. The politics of a political majority are free to all to make and unmake. The politics of a communal majority are made by its own members and members who are born in it. So he basically wonders, how can a communal majority run away with the title deeds given to a political majority to rule? So the trick that parliamentary democracy does is converts the communal majority into a political majority, which for him was represented by the Congress. So he was battling this, and this was at the heart of his concerns each time he was talking about how to divide states, how to think of a water policy which would be shared well by the riparian states. The Hirakud project was something that he was greatly invested in. You should see even the division of Maharashtra. He wants 4 states in Maharashtra. So all this Maharashtra Ekikaran Samiti nonsense which is going on right now about a larger integrated Maharashtra, he says will lead to communal majorities. And he was very, very far-sighted in saying that, because he anticipated in some sense the rise of Hindutva and the logic of communal majority claiming political majority and coming to power, which we saw happening. But for him, the Congress was no different from what the BJP did. The BJP was more brazen about saying that they are communal, they are going to do this, and this is how they were. And whereas Ambedkar was pitched against a Mahatma like Gandhi, in the sense that he was overarching figure, called the father of the nation and whatnot. And most of Ambedkar's battles ended up being battles with Gandhi and Nehru and a kind of a Brahminical Congress which he had to take on. And in this whole battle, in 1936, when he writes Annihilation of Caste, and actually when Gandhi meets Ambedkar in the roundtable conferences in 1930-31, he's not even sure when he first reads Ambedkar that he's a Dalit. He assumes that he's a Brahmin. And Pyarelal, his secretary, has recorded this. He's saying, how can this, he thinks of him as a self-hating Brahmin, because he's quoting the scriptures at the drop of a hat. He is so well versed, and Gandhi himself doesn't know his scriptures as well as Ambedkar did. And he's completely at a loss about who this articulate scholar might be. So he thinks he's a self-hating Brahmin, and Pyarelal, his secretary, corrects him and says, no, he's actually a Dalit. So this whole idea that there could be a scholarly Dalit was something that did not set into the caste stereotype that Gandhi had of him. And I would just like to read a bit from Annihilation of Caste, where he engages with Gandhi, and this is a debate which follows. The Annihilation of Caste was an address which Ambedkar gave in 1936 at the behest of Jat Paat Todak Mandal. Actually, it was an address which was not delivered. Suppose somebody asked me to come and speak here and said, send me your speech first, I would like to vet it, which is what they did with Ambedkar's speech. He sent it to them, and then they developed cold feet, and they said, you have to drop all these attacks on the scriptures, the Shastras, the Vedas, and you're being too belligerent. We are sorry, we are a reformist organization, but we don't want to have you. It's like saying the National Secular Society calls somebody and then says, oh God, you're too secular, we can't have you talking here. It was the equivalent of that. And he was denied a chance to express himself, so he goes ahead and publishes this whole tract in 1936. And I'd first read a bit of Gandhi's rebuttal to it, where the first objection that Gandhi makes is to the price of the... Okay. See, this is what Ambedkar says to, Gandhi says to Ambedkar. Dr. Ambedkar was not going to be beaten by the reception committee of the Jat Paat Todak Mandal. He has answered their rejection of him by publishing the address at his own expense. And the first comment Gandhi makes is he has priced it at 8 annas, which is like, say, 8 pence. I would suggest a reduction to 2 annas or at least 4 annas. Why am I making much of this? Here's a man who's reading it. He's from a business class. He's a baniya. The first thing that occurs to him about a book is not its ideas, but its price. And he says this is 8 annas, make it 2 annas, make it 4 annas. And this, I would say, is also the caste mentality of a baniya, speaking about what should be the right price of a book. And then they joust on this issue, and Ambedkar simply concludes by saying, unlike the Mahatma, there are Hindu leaders who are not merely content to believe and follow, they dare to think and act in accordance with the result of their thinking. But unfortunately, they are either a dishonest lot or an indifferent lot when it comes to the question of giving right guidance to the mass of people. Almost every Brahmin has transgressed the rule of caste. The number of Brahmins who sell shoes is far greater than those who practice priesthood. So the point that Ambedkar makes is that Hindus in the words of Matthew Arnold, are wandering between two worlds, one dead, the other powerless to be born. What are they to do? The Mahatma to whom they appeal for guidance does not believe in thinking and therefore give no guidance which can be said to stand the test of expertise. So he is basically talking about Gandhi as an unthinking person who does not want to exercise his mind, because if you did read what Ambedkar had to say of saying, let's purge the Hindu society of caste if it's possible. And what do you need to do to do that before you do anything? You need to first disbelieve your scriptures and then make a new compact with the world. And for him, that was about an investment in reason, a kind of a social contract that you sign, the efforts he made at writing the constitution, and which also failed him. Because when he writes the constitution, at the heart of it is the fact that this is what he says in 1931 when he's negotiating with the Round Table Conference. A patriot and a nationalist in India is the one who sees with open eyes his fellow men treated as being less than men. But his humanity does not rise in protest. He knows that men and women for no cause are denied their human rights, but it does not prick his civic sense to helpful action. He finds whole classes of people shut out from public employment, but it does not rouse his sense of justice and fair play. Hundreds of evil practices that injure man and society are perceived by him, but they do not sicken him with disgust. The patriot's cry is power and more power for him and for his class. I am glad I do not belong to that class of patriots. I belong to that class which takes its stand on democracy and which seeks to destroy monopoly in every shape and form. Our aim is to realize and practice our ideal of one man, one value in all walks of life, political, economic, and social. Now, this was something that he said in 1931, and if you see, after he engages with the Congress and Gandhi and decides to get into a certain arrangement with Nehru about drafting the Constitution of India, in this is after nearly 28 years from 1931. On November 25th, 1949, he makes an address to the Constituent Assembly, and this is the day when they are winding up proceedings. He says, in politics, we'll be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, and one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our economic and social structure, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? If we continue to deny it for long, we'll do so only by putting our political democracy in peril. So he is sitting at the head of the Constitution Committee, drafting the Constitution, but he realizes that the radicalism which he wants to imbue it with is not going to be really possible. He wanted an annulling of the Pune Pact, he wanted separate electorates, which was his unique contribution to the expansion of or the deepening of democracy in India. What were the separate electorates? I'll just briefly give you an idea of why, for minority rights, Ambedkar believed separate electorates were necessary. In separate electorates, you would have the idea that a Dalit, an untouchable, would vote and elect to the legislature their own representative, A, and they would also, meaning the caste Hindus will not have a right to elect the untouchable candidate. Because the caste Hindu would manipulate simply because of their communal majority, the caste Hindus would come together and choose such an untouchable, such a Dalit, who would be kowtowing to their demands and acquiesce completely to their logic. So you would have a creation of MPs and members of parliament and legislature who would be completely upholding the interests of caste Hindus. Today you have about 127 members from Dalit communities in the Indian Lok Sabha, out of a house of 543. But that doesn't guarantee that they are fighting for Dalit rights, which was the logic that Ambedkar was using. Ambedkar said only Dalits will have a right to elect Dalit representatives, and the Dalits will also vote for the caste Hindu candidate in the caste Hindu constituency, meaning they would have two votes, one to represent themselves, one to choose who among the caste Hindus might best represent their interest. This was something Gandhi completely opposed. He said this is completely wrong. He did agree to it when they signed the Ramsay MacDonald Communal Award in 1931. He reneges on it, goes back and sits on a fast, a dharna, and then makes Ambedkar sign the Pune Pact, which completely dilutes this and ensures that more Dalits are represented, but caste Hindus will have a say in voting which Dalit goes to power, gets to power. So this whole system gets skewed, and Ambedkar is still keen on reviving separate electorates when he is talking to the Constituent Assembly, but he does not have his way. So eventually, what does he think is a solution for Dalits? At one point, he has been engaging with Buddhism all through, and he decides in 1956, on December 6th, to do a mass conversion to Buddhism. For me, when I read Ambedkar sequentially, and when he uses words like we need to do things with cold-blooded reason, this did not appear to be a natural choice. How is religion going to solve the problem of Dalits when especially he's taking a kind of a mass 5 to 6 lakh people into this, and he said you will be denied reservation, but you can give it up. We don't need reservation. We need to build a life for ourselves and move on. But if you see his sense of what is religion, for him, Ambedkar clearly talked about religion as sacred morality. He found that Hindu and Hindu-dominated Indian society completely lacked in ethics and morality. And he wanted a moral core for a community to be formed. And he found that Buddhism, and his Buddhism was rejected by the Mahabodhi society, by everybody, and the lamas and the clergy of Buddhism. They completely rejected his. They thought this guy is an atheist. What is he doing with religion? And what is this atheistic religion that he is trying to create? What was his Buddhism? If you see the 20 oaths that were administered in Nagpur on December 6, October 14th, 1956, he was talking about how we will not believe in the Vedas, how we will not believe in the predominance of the Brahmin and his superordinate self, how you do not want to do this, how you do not want to do this. It's about, the whole thing is about negating something rather than saying this is what I am going to be doing. And then subsequently he thinks of the Panchshila, and if you read the Panchshila and say, I mean, it's about right conduct, right behavior, it doesn't sound very religious. And so there is an effort here at creating a rational religion, which is why I think Ambedkar's effort did not go down well with the Dalit masses, simply because they did not know what to cling to after conversion. At his orders, they did throw away a lot of idols into the rivers and into the wells and sold them. Some of them smelted them and made Buddhas out of them, the old idols. Some of them just made instruments out of them as a form of protest. But this spirit did not last. And the reason for it is you have to give a sense of the Hindus, the Dalits, the Mahars who largely converted were also quite invested in religion, which was of the Hindu kind. They were involved with practices like dowry. There were practices like child marriage happening. They were following the Hindu norms of puja and keeping, fasts on particular dates, and they believed in the same lunar calendar and everything. Suddenly, to sever that and then to say you're moving to a community which is rational religion, where there's no need for worship, there's no need for ritual, there are no festivals, what do? After 10 years, you're going to relapse into what was Hinduism. There are more Mahar Buddhists today who observe Sai Baba and other kind of new rituals, and there are people who are taking to all kinds of new Hinduistic practices, simply because for them, the idea of a rational religion did not work. So that, I think, is not a failure on Ambedkar's part, because what he was trying to use religion for was simply to make people say that they are not Hindus, that they can move away from caste. Buddhism for him was a way of saying, I am rejecting caste. And this was not as if it did not have impact. There was a huge spurt of literature, there was a huge spurt of revival of a kind of a humanist interest, and the Dalits regarded themselves not as caste people, but as anti-caste neo-Buddhists. But again, the problem has been that Ambedkar's Buddhism has been seen as purely relegated to Dalits. It hasn't been, and Ambedkar, not just on his Buddhism, on his various ideas, when he talks about Ranade, Gandhi, Jinnah, and what is the role of a public intellectual, or when he talks about what is the role of minorities, what about dams, and what do you do with linguistic states, the range of subjects on which he dwelt, people have not owned him up simply because he's a Dalit. It is another matter that only Dalits are owning up to him. But the question for me is, why are non-Dalits not engaging with Ambedkar? It stems out of this whole casteist mindset, which is kind of seeped into Hindu society in a kind of a unpurgeable way. And you have people simply believing that Ambedkar was somebody who was an anti-national person, who was separatist, who wanted separate electorates. So he is kind of not engaged with. People do not read him. People in India, if you just go even to people who are experts in political science, they would not know what exactly the whole question of separate electorates, joint electorates, what was Ambedkar's concerns at the Round Table Conference. These have not entered mainstream debates. And these have not entered mainstream textbooks and mainstream history books. So unfortunately, the legacy of Ambedkar has been reduced to Dalits claiming it, and many Dalits still do not have the opportunity to engage with Ambedkar and his ideas, because there are only 2 out of 100 Dalits managing to get some decent education, which is beyond your matriculation, and being able to graduate is really a dream for a lot of Dalits. They're not even able to use the constitutional provisions of affirmative action, quota, reservation, and come to a stage where they can engage with the ideas of Ambedkar. For most Dalits, mere survival after you become a graduate becomes a big question. So there's no time to grapple with serious questions of activism and political change and social reform. So they are a very tired and besieged community even today. So it's not, for me, it's not enough that even the small middle class which emerges out of that, the small educated class which emerges out of that, it might be tired of engaging with Ambedkar. But it is for the rest of civil society to get to the core of this person, read him. And at Navayana, one of the efforts that I've been making is to, these are volumes which are very rarely available. Right now we are talking to Verso about doing an edition in their Revolution series on Ambedkar and his annihilation of caste. I mean, they have Terry Eagleton introducing Robespierre, you have somebody introducing the speeches of Castro, you have Trotsky being introduced by Slavoj Žižek. This is a whole series that Verso does. For me, not just non-Dalits in India, but Ambedkar needs to be claimed at a global platform as a humanist, as somebody who invested himself in a kind of a secular fight. And for that, engagement with his ideas, one of the things we are trying to do is get a publisher like Verso here to engage with this idea. I mean, it's still in the pipeline, but they are very much interested. And the idea is to pitchfork Ambedkar as a revolutionary thinker among a larger plane of intellectuals who are kind of considered global intellectuals. If Indians are more, they're the Marxists in India who are more willing to engage with Marx and then subsequently political theory that comes around Marxism. They would read Althusser, they would read a Derrida, they would read a Heidegger, they would read any kind of philosopher, but they wouldn't really go anywhere near Ambedkar. Why is that so? If you read his States and Minorities, that was an act of big state socialism that Ambedkar wanted. He wanted nationalization of banks, he wanted nationalization of lands and redistribution of them to scheduled castes. It is the kind of a hoax that Indian communists and progressives have played in not engaging even with a text like States and Minorities. And when you introduce it to them, they said, we never knew he wrote all this. And he comes across as somebody who wanted socialism much more than Nehru. Nehru is projected as a kind of a socialist bent, as a person with socialist bent. But it was Ambedkar in States and Minorities, which was a kind of a draft constitution, and in which he talks about, it's a draft constitution for the United States of India. He had a completely different idea of what to call India. He clearly knew that there are fragmentary pools, there are several states, linguistic identities, caste identities, communal identities, which are going to lay siege to this idea of the nation. He wanted two capitals. He said India as a huge mass is too unmanageable. And he gives you a distance chart. As he says, he believes in cold-blooded reason. There's a chart he gives you about the miles from Delhi to Hyderabad, Delhi to Chennai, Delhi to Trivandrum, and says how far these places are and how it's not going to be possible for Delhi. He brings in a defense and security angle to argue that there need to be two capitals. For this, he's called an anti-national person, that he wanted to split India, that he wanted to break India, which is not the case. He wanted smaller states, a logic to which the Indian political system has come around to. After 1990s, 1995, you had the creation of Uttarakhand, you have the creation of several smaller states. India had, when I was in school, India had about 21, 22 states, and today it's grown up to 29, which is exactly what Ambedkar was saying. But nobody who is talking on television debates and public debates about linguistic states and reorganization of states today is even mentioning Ambedkar and his important contribution in this direction. So it's a great loss for a lot of people, not just non-Dalits, but for, I would say, a larger group in the world which believes in humanism and rationalism, if they do not engage with Ambedkar. His writings are now almost in the public domain. They are available for free on the internet. All you need to do is download them and read them. You don't need to really carry around fat volumes around you. So my plea to IHEU would be, if the propagation of the legacy of Ambedkar is concerned, they should also get involved in probably organizing lectures which introduce Ambedkar, take key texts of Ambedkar and try to contextualize him in the larger realm of intellectuals who have engaged with the ideas of secularism and humanism, and place him. And Meera Nanda is one person who has done work on placing him in the larger humanist tradition of John Dewey and others who were humanists and rationalists. And there is a need to first read him and engage with him and debate him, which has not happened in so many years. Thank you.
Thank you, Anand, for covering the wide range that Ambedkar's life spanned and the issues he considered. Those of us who have learnt about I've noted your name. Those of us who have learnt about Indian history through Attenborough's film on Gandhi would not know that there was a man called Ambedkar who lived and existed. Those of us who want to know something about Ambedkar today will not find a film available about him. And it's only its centenary year that some pressure was put on one provincial government to produce a collection of Ambedkar's activities. I think Ambedkar was, of course, very complex as a person, and to talk about him in half an hour's time is very, very difficult. Did he convert to Buddhism readily is not so obvious. He had lots of discussions. The Muslims went and met him. The Christians went and met him. The Sikhs went and met him. Ambedkar did not say to them, I am going to be a Buddhist, don't come to me. He held long talks with them. And the reason why the Christians are very sore with Ambedkar and in their Dalit activism will not really mention Ambedkar when they are talking about liberation of the Dalits is because the guy didn't become a Christian. That was one soul they tried to harvest and it didn't work. So people are always looking at Ambedkar as somebody they could make use of, and there are still people who are making use of him, of course. He was, of course, the father of the Indian Constitution, but scholars now say that perhaps his role was a bit exaggerated. Perhaps the recognition must go to also Sapru and the others who have been involved in the writing of the Constitution. And these are friends of Ambedkar who are re-evaluating Ambedkar's own contribution. And one thing I would like to add to what Anand said, and this is why most caste Hindus do not like Ambedkar even today. He was the one who piloted the Hindu Reform Bill. He was the one, as law minister, reformed the Hindu Personal Code, something that the government of India or the Muslim scholars today are still unable to do with the Muslim code. And he dared tell the Hindus they couldn't have 4 wives anymore. He dared tell them that their traditional customary practices could not work in a civilized country.
If I just may add there, he is the core of the Hindu code bill which upset the caste Hindus and particularly the Brahmins was it gave the right to property to women and the right to divorce. And I'll just read out a reaction of one of the members to the Hindu code bill after it was introduced. This is Pandit Lakshmi Kanta Maitra, which is obvious from his name, he is a Brahmin male. I feel that the basic conception of Hindu marriage has suffered the rudest possible shock by introduction into it of the matter of divorce, which is so repugnant to Hindu notions of marriage. Hindu marriage, as ought to be known to everyone who professes himself to be a Hindu, who honestly takes pride in calling himself a Hindu, as I myself do, is a sacrament and not a civil contract as such, and as such it will not be difficult for him to admit that divorce is absolutely foreign to its concept. Union by marriage, according to Hindu Shastras, is sacred and absolutely indissoluble. And there are people in the Hindu, when the Hindu Code Bill was being debated and Ambedkar resigned as law minister because Nehru kind of literally backstabbed him. He didn't support him on the bill. If Nehru had supported Ambedkar on this bill, he wouldn't have had to resign, and his resignation letter was also something that he couldn't read out and he had to release it to the press. There's H.V. Kamath who says, well sir, I do not subscribe to that notion of inequality propounded here. On the other hand, I do not believe that women, as some of them do today, attain equality with men by taking to smoking and drinking. So there was this whole charge on Ambedkar that he was westernizing Indian society, breaking the great Hindu family, advocating divorce, and saying that we must all women must all have right to property. No, he says, sir, this is something which is so deprecated if by that they seek equality with man. Nor do I subscribe to the progressive conception of women, progressive in the Western sense, who perhaps in the imitation of the West and so trying to be progressive, takes to ballroom dancing and other Western habits. This, sir, is also to my mind no way of securing equality with man. And here he quotes Sarvepalli Radhakrishna when he says, great savant and philosopher, who was quite a very core conservative Hindu. The modern woman, if I may say so, this is Radhakrishnan, is losing her self-respect. She does not respect her own individuality and uniqueness, but is paying an unconscious tribute to man by trying to imitate him. She is fast becoming masculine and mechanical. So Ambedkar was pitted against this whole conservative group when he was doing the Hindu Code Bill. And that was something that he could not do in the Constituent Assembly, which is why he was trying to do it after that. In the Constituent Assembly also, Ambedkar's role, as Babu says, needs to be re-examined simply because he couldn't get done all that he wanted. How can it be, we talk of it as only his constitution, when if you read states and minorities and what is there in it, 90% of it doesn't figure in the constitution. What little 10% he has given, we are grateful to it, sure. But we should also look at why he couldn't do so many things. Sorry.
I just wanted to supplement what you were saying. Because it's complex. There are two people that India abandoned to her own discredit and disadvantage. One was M.N. Roy, the other was Ambedkar. These two people had the potential of turning India into a modern society. And both of these people were not owned up by India. And the result we see, the social disaster that continues to happen in India, is a result of that. The important thing, yesterday some questions were raised about whether Ambedkar was for Indian independence. I don't care whether he was for Indian independence, he was for human freedom. And this was the two parallel movements in India, which started in the 1800s. One was one for political independence, the other was social emancipation. And Ambedkar belonged to that great tradition of social reformers and freedom fighters in the real sense, because he was trying to bring freedom to the people. Sadly, Ambedkar has also been abandoned by the caste politicians among the Dalit groups. Today, Ambedkar is just a tool for harvesting votes. He is not someone who gives direction to thinking. There are now entrenched interests who want to advertise their caste identity as if doing that will let the caste system go away. This is the context. Yogesh ji wanted to say something.
I must congratulate Anand. After a long time, I heard a very clear, exact analysis of Dr. Ambedkar's thoughts. I had a privilege to be in 1956, 14th October in Nagpur, as a 15-year-old young lad who was watching everything. And next day, I had a privilege to sit before him 10 feet away for about 2 hours. So I'm very privileged in that matter. What I find is that the reason after 21 years of study of different religions and approached by all the head guys from around the world, including Ismaili faith, an offer of all kinds of money. He refused to listen to anything. He decided to do what is best for the country, and he followed Buddhism for a simple reason, for a much more complex reason obviously, is that one, he found that equality, justice and fraternity are totally the foundations of religion. Mythology is not there in this religion. Our people were preoccupied with the mythology of Hindu religion for generations. He wanted to shade them all that, and that is why those 22 oaths come into the picture. And he wanted to connect the Dalit community to the Buddhist community. So there is a vast brotherhood outside available, and he was going continuously to Burma. He was invited in 1950 to Sri Lanka to see how the Buddhist life is led. Anand Kaushal was one of its associates, and I had a lot of discussions with him. Then Burma he followed very closely, and he was linking the actual practice of Buddhism being very strong in Burma. He was linking the Burmese way of practicing the Buddhism. And by doing that, he was shading all the baggage our people were carrying for many generations. Unfortunately, after he was gone, his lieutenants, for the sake of their personal small gains, divided the group and destroyed the whole movement. And then on the top of that, the necessity for teaching the common masses the practice of Buddhism lagged because there were no bhikkhus. So Sri Lankan people started to send the bhikkhus. That was not enough. We are still studying to a small degree. And our intellectuals went after a nice way of life than bringing Ambedkar to the people to a great extent. So these are a lot of failures on our part. The failures on the part of the nation you have already mentioned. And I think as the days pass by, Dr. Ambedkar's legacy will not disappear, but will be strengthened. There are people like you and there are many other people I came across over the last 40 years. What I see is the movement of Dr. Ambedkar, his doctrines, which you have mentioned to many of them, are very valuable to this nation to get it lost. And I think we'll be looking forward in the near future for having more and more youngsters like you discussing all these matters at a national level and around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you, thank you. One point is, in 1932, after the disillusionment of Pune Pact and all that, he makes a statement that it was my misfortune to be born a Hindu, but I'm not going to die one. And this is my last speech as a Hindu, he says. That triggers a huge reaction, and the Congress mobilizes several leaders from within the Dalit community, including people like MC Raja from Tamil Nadu, to say that they oppose him and that Hinduism has got enough guarantees and there's a leader like Gandhi and they'll be taken care of within Hinduism. They are very much Hindus, and there are people who are ascertaining the fact that they have led a Hindu life, and why is this man saying all this? But subsequently the Sikhs and others did, Ambedkar did explore Sikhism more strongly than he ever did Christianity. He would never have gone with Christianity simply because of the charge that would come in terms of colonial power and he didn't seriously consider Christianity, but he did explore Buddhism. But the whole Sikh clergy was opposed to it, in the sense that if you take the population of Punjab, 28% of the population even today is Dalit, and in the undivided Punjab, which was much more, and if you converted all the Dalits to Sikhism, then the number of Jat Sikhs and the number of caste Hindu Sikhs, those who have caste Hindu origins, because in Sikhism there is a lot of caste, as even yesterday it was pointed out, then they would be outnumbered and the Dalits would become the majority. So there is this correspondence between the SGPC and Ambedkar and all this, which lays bare the fact that they dissuaded him from coming to Sikhism, because they are going to be completely outnumbered by them, and simply a communal majority of Dalits was going to be created. So there was this fear. And his attraction to Buddhism was over 30, 35 years he had been reading the subject and engaging with it. There was no question of a commercial interest, or he was of course dismayed by the fact that a religion which was born here, which was more than a religion, a political philosophy for him. Buddha, the historical Buddha which he tried to reclaim, I would urge you all to read a book called A Spoke in the Wheel. It's a historical retelling of Buddha's life by Amita Kanekar. You keep hearing about all kinds of Booker, White Tiger kind of novels, but this is a remarkable novel, historical fiction, which recreates Buddha in his own time through a scribe called Upali in Ashoka's time, who's been commissioned the job of writing a biography of Buddha. And the Ashokan Empire then is trying to curtail the kind of a rational biography that he is about to write, because he is demythifying the Buddha. By then the myths about Buddha by Ashoka's period were getting, this whole thing of mythology. I'm sitting and reading a wonderful fantasy tale about how a monkey king tries to get the Tripitaka from India. So there's a lot of mythology in Buddhism. There are a lot of colorful stories in Buddhism, the Jatakas and other things. But Ambedkar did not show any interest in all these myth-making projects, which had been appropriated by the Hindu Puranic tradition from Buddhism actually. Buddhism is full of wonderful stories and tales. Very entertaining kathas and kathakar tradition out there also, which has completely been kicked out of India. All Buddhist manuscripts you cannot find in the Indian subcontinent. You will find them in Southeast Asia, you will find them in Japan, you will find them in China, but you will not find them here. So there was, Ambedkar's attraction to Buddhism was, I would say, purely from a philosophical standpoint, more than from a very doctrinaire religious standpoint.
Maybe Rama.
Yeah, thanks Anand for a very enlightened talk. A few points, whether Ambedkar, why did he go to Buddhism or not? Ambedkar as I said, yesterday also wrote over a long period. Some of his views changed after 40s. Many of the Ambedkarites living here use Ambedkar of 30s. And Ambedkar agitating all the time, I will not die as a Hindu. I won't die as a Hindu. All the time is debated Gandhi when he was engaged in this caste debate. But post 40s, you see Ambedkar was in a constructive mode. And when he started writing, say, drafting this state and minorities, and he would talk about land reform, talk about nationalization, and started his own educational institutions. It's where, the Ambedkarite movement failed in a constructive movement. The constructive movement where they can go, they can reach the masses and educate them about Ambedkarism. The other thing I found is that you said that Ambedkar legacy is not being accepted today. Ambedkar is a marketing commodity today. And he is being fixed by the right-wing forces also. The BJP used Ambedkar, the Hindutva used Ambedkar's thoughts on Pakistan as a half portion of it against Muslims, printed in Urdu, term is anti-Muslim. And Ambedkar's argument with Gandhi, they also are being used by the Hindutva forces in India. So we have to be very careful. Some of the Ambedkarites today, even writing Ambedkar wanted to convert to Islam. And the whole writing, I've seen they give the booklets to everyone, say why he wanted to convert to Islam, he was talking to Nizam, and all these things. And there's a good friend of mine who wrote this book. Ambedkar wanted to convert to Islam, and he talked to a former Chamar who converted to Islam. And the whole theory, and when I wrote a review of that, I say Ambedkar was essentially a humanist, a rationalist. He was questioning Gita, he was questioning Mahabharata, he was questioning gods. He could have questioned Quran and Bibles also. So that is the point I want to say. And also, were the Christians ready for it? I know many of the Christian groups in India who wanted to propagate Ambedkar now found Jyotiba Phule more entertaining than Ambedkar, and they give a slogan, Jai Jyoti, instead of Jai Ambedkar, and going to all these communities. The other problem of Ambedkar, you said upper caste not reading Ambedkar. I say we have to also understand how many Dalits read Ambedkar. And Ambedkar's legacy is basically owned by particular communities. As in Maharashtra, Mahar say we are the original Ambedkarite, nobody else has a right to speak on Ambedkar. Agar Chamar Maharashtra mein, if they try to do something on Ambedkar, the Mahars will just agitate and organize, we are the original Ambedkarite. And only the Buddhist people are the Dalits, and nobody else has a right to say.
In fact, at one point they refused to use the word Dalit also. They would
Yeah,
say,
in
this
Uttar
Buddhist
Pradesh,
literature or Dalit literature
You
that
see,
you have
in
produced?
Uttar Pradesh, now after the Chamars feel that Ambedkar was a Chamar, and the Jatovs and Chamar, they say Ambedkar was a Chamar. So obviously the other communities are also looking their idols. So the Malis, these what you call this Mali community?
Gardeners.
The gardeners claimed Phule was our man. So the Kurmis, which is actually a very the backward community, they say the Sardar Patel was our man. So he's our icon. There is a community called Rajbhar, and they are told, don't read Ambedkar. Oh, there was one king who was our God, who is our leader. So don't go to Ambedkar. So these identities and sub-identities, and every identity is trying. Valmikis. You see, you are talking about Valmiki, but there is a problem. Valmiki normally don't come with the Chamars and Ambedkarites. Whatever Bhagwan Das ji say, he is an isolated man, poor Bhagwan Das. No Valmiki actually invite him in his meetings. So this is a problem. They don't go with it. Because they say Ambedkar is pitched against the Valmikis, he never worked with this. And that's why you find most of the Gandhians with Valmikis. A tragedy of the whole thing, where Gandhi wanted them to be doing the same work. And Ambedkar was a humanist, you see the whole Hindu code will debate. And the Hindu code will debate, a RSS fellow, Syama Prasad Mukherjee, said that why don't you make a same bill for the Muslims? And Ambedkar says, give me 24 hours and I will draft a Muslim code bill. And in the same parliament, a Muslim fellow says, it is not acceptable. We can't accept these kind of things. So, and people are calling him modern Manu. So you see whole kind of things. But Ambedkar legacy, basically Ambedkarites also have to think, can any upper caste write on Ambedkar? Would you be accepted? That's also a fact. And once, you see, when you narrow down the person, Ambedkar was a great human right defender. I call him as a humanist. But there are problems of, our identities and who is original writer. People go and see your caste first. Oh, whether this man can speak on Dalit or not speak on Dalit. So this is like a narrow-mindedness, and we are actually playing the games of the upper caste at the end. As I said yesterday, this multiple identities and trying to find our own leaders in our own identities. Like Bhagat Singh became a Jat Kathura and Udham Singh became a Dalit. So this is the same thing. We are defeating the purpose. People are writing about Kabir. That Ravi Das is a Chamar and Kabir is not a Chamar. And that is the tragedy of the whole thing, I would say, in India. And this is the intellectual bankruptcy, I would say. So the Dalit intelligentsia have to seek themselves. What are they doing? Why are they saying that Buddha was a Kshatriya, Buddha was not a Dalit? And they are blaming today. The debate is going beyond that.
I know. There's this whole thing of why was Ambedkar attracted to Buddhism? Buddha is after all Kshatriya. I mean, now where do you really begin? If you really historicize untouchability, there was no untouchability in the sense in which we see today.
So you have to come to a moderating point now and involve all the Dalit section, different Dalit section, and not which one hero. Dalit legacy is a very big legacy. Ambedkar is a central theme of it, but not the end, not the beginning.
Sure.
Lokayat, Buddha, Charvak, Kabir, Periyar, Phule, Nanak, so many. And such a big legacy just confined to a small thing and then fighting and putting that he is not from our caste, he is not from that caste. I think it is the self-defeating exercise and we must work on it. Thank you.
We must engage with Lakshmi Narasu, who in 1902, 1913, he produced two important books on the essence of Buddhism and a critique of the caste system. And Ambedkar reissued Lakshmi Narasu's book in 1942 with his own preface. So he has a long engagement with Buddhism. And people like Ayoti Das in Tamil Nadu did not believe in conversion to Buddhism. They said, we are Buddhists. Even if you use Ambedkar's logic of saying how, if you read his essay on who were the untouchables and how untouchability and beef eating were linked and how during the Buddhist period the idea of broken men, the whole word Dalit comes from there, broken men was created, and how people who ate beef were vilified, and whereas the Buddhist idea of revival of agriculture and stopping of yagnas and sacrifices, he makes a historical inquiry into all these problems in the 30s, and he is attracted to Buddhism simply because he says it is the annihilation of Buddhism and those who were defiantly Buddhist that creates untouchability in India. So, and someone like Ayoti Das in as early as 1907, 1908 talked about Parayar community in Tamil Nadu being Buddhist, period. So it's a reversion. If you've forgotten your tradition, you just go back to it. It's not even an act of conversion.
Yeah.
I would like to thank Anand on your behalf. We are 1 hour behind schedule, of which half an hour is because we got engaged in this discussion. This is a discussion I'm sure will continue as well. The important thing that comes out through the discussions and what also our speaker said is that Ambedkar is a big man and he's made small by those who have been claiming to be owning him. And it is important to rescue Ambedkar not only from the BJP that you pointed out, but also from the Dalits. The Dalits who have destroyed Ambedkar's heritage, who claim to be speaking in the name of Ambedkar and probably setting up paper tigers to represent them in parliament and in politics. Ambedkar's essential thrust, and that is the reason why Hindu society still is angry with him, is his critiques of Hindu religion, his examination of Hindu thoughts. And unless one goes back to that critical, free-thinking basis on which Ambedkar built his, what we think is valuable in Ambedkar's legacy, then it is empty. The world's largest number of statues are not for Jesus Christ or Lord Krishna. They are for Ambedkar, but they are all in the Dalit Vadas, not elsewhere. They are in the ghettos of the Dalits. It is important to restore Ambedkar to be in this grand pantheon of the freedom fighters of the world. And that is an effort that should not be left only to the Dalits who are misappropriating his legacy. should not be left to the fundamentalists who are misusing it, but perhaps it should be given to those writers of history and freedom and liberty to situate him in the right place. Thank you, Anand. This is not an easy task, what you have taken up. And it is a man who is complex and who will require more discussion, disagreement and analysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Babu. I don't think I could do justice to the topic as much as I would have loved to, but it was just my humble effort. And I mean, since he mentioned this whole bus thing, Bhagwan Das uses a poem from 1922, and carve no bust for me, lest though I become not a demigod, the reality of my soul be lost, so that thieves and liars who were my enemies and destroyed me, and the children of thieves and liars may claim me and affirm before my bust that they stood with me in the days of my defeat. So this is a kind of a poem which anticipates what will happen to, this whole bust culture and people just venerating the bust, but actually being thieves and liars. For me it was so evocative in the context of what Mayawati is doing in terms of legacy of Ambedkar, in terms of wonderful, marvelous, huge statues, that's all. Not the books.
Thank you, Anand.
Thank you.